Welcome to the CoreWalking podcast, Step in the Right Direction. I'm Alex Mabalon.
And I'm Jonathan Fitzgordon.
And we're here to talk about plantar fasciitis today, if memory serves, right? That's what we talked about. At the end of our last podcast, we're going to talk about plantar fasciitis. So let's talk about plantar fasciitis. I mean, I don't, to be honest, I'm feeling a little bit of plantar fascia pain in my foot these days, and I think I've been doing a lot more weightlifting with barbells. We were talking about kettlebells earlier too, and I think we'll do a whole separate episode on that because kettlebells they rock, and I've been getting into those as well. And it seems you have, from what we're talking about. But the barbell squats, because I'm trying to do single leg squats in order to isolate my weaker leg, I think is what we'll call it. Everybody who's been listening to this podcast for a while knows that we both have janky knees. And for you, it's both. For me, it's particularly my left. So my left quad, as a result, is not as strong, right? So I'm trying to get it back to be strong so I can age gracefully, right? We should change the name of this podcast to How to Age Gracefully, actually.
I like the step in the right direction.
What's that?
I like the title. I like the step in the right direction.
Step in the right direction to age gracefully. Subtitle.
Well, that is what it's all about.
It is what it's all about. I know that it all relates. It's not so much about the plantar fascia as it is the rest of the foot and the calf muscle, right? And it travels even probably all the way up to your hip. I mean, there's definitely studies that I've come across online that talk about, how your hip is related to your plantar fasciitis, which is a little bit intense, but it makes sense because if your hip is turning out, your whole leg is affected, right? So I don't know. I have a client who has really bad plantar fasciitis, and I at some point in my training, I always ask some people to take off their shoes and to just do stuff barefoot. Certain exercises I think are better done barefoot, like barbell squats, for example, is a good example because I want your feet to be on flat ground, and you really want to be getting as much flexion in your ankle as you can. The idea is to work on the flexion in your ankle too. Like, I'm happy for people to build muscle and be pushing as much weight as they can, on their back. But really what I'm interested in, again, about aging gracefully is to maintain the integrity of your joints, but also the flexibility of them, and some people like you are hyperflex, and that's, then you got to really build a lot more muscle, I think is the way to counter that. But most people have very poor ankle mobility, right? So
plus I don't understand working out with sneakers in a lot of ways, coming from the yoga world, I never worked out with your barefoot, right? Like, it's just the way to go. And when I got the Bosu, one of my favorite toys, I do that barefoot. But when you go online to watch Bosu videos, everyone's in sneakers. And I get it, you're in the gym and you got to wear sneakers, but I don't see any good reason to do any exercise with shoes on, unless you need to wear minimal shoes because you're in the gym or whatever. But supported shoes and things like that, they, just like what you're saying, is they get in the way of developing good joint mobility. So that's just a really important thing for me. And one of the things I talk about a lot that absolutely freaks me out is clients who come to me and say they've been to the podiatrist or a doctor who says never go barefoot again because of their foot problems. And it's just blows my mind, because the idea shouldn't be never go barefoot again. It should be do everything you possibly can to spend all your time barefoot. And in the winter, I don't go out barefoot, right? I'm so excited for spring because it's time to break out my minimal shoes. But
I thought you were tougher than that. I thought you went out barefoot even in the snow.
Man, I do not like the cold. The cold and me do not get along.
No, I understand what you're saying, and I'm 100% with you. with that being said, I mean, and it's like what you said, a few podcast sessions ago, who am I to say that if you haven't been able to run and now you can run in your Hokas, who am I to say that you should stop wearing Hokas? And I think that's the problem with this client. She's very fit. She works out all the time. Um, but she's like, I cannot, she's a theater director, so she's like, I cannot have like a plantar fasciitis flare up because I gotta be on my feet all the time to like direct these people. And she's also a choreographer, so she has to be able to dance and show moves and stuff like that. So I understand that. At the same time, I'm like, this is never gonna be resolved unless you decide to like be doing some of this stuff barefoot, And while I know there's, you have a 4-year-old, an 8-year-old, or I don't forget, she has young kids, and um, she's got this job where she has to stand up. There's a part of me that feels like I really want to tell her, you need to start going barefoot in order for this to fix, and in order for your Achilles tendon to elongate at some point, because ultimately, I think, the Achilles probably it's a shortness in the Achilles tendon that contributes to her plantar fasciitis. But I could be
Well,
wrong about that because you have more
I'm
experience
not
with than
saying
I
you're
do.
wrong about that, but to go back to the earlier thing is I don't, even though all I do is tell people what to do, I just say it would be best to be barefoot, right? I worked with someone yesterday who's been wearing orthotics forever, and I'm like,
Mm,
don't just get rid of your orthotics, but try to make it a project over the next year to get rid of your orthotics. So
right.
it's for me, it's about meeting people where they are. So the theater director, choreographer, I totally understand that. And so maybe it's 10 minutes a day barefoot, right? But it's great. Like she is afraid of the flare up happening for any reason because it's going to interfere with her life. And I completely relate to that. And there isn't a great argument to tell somebody to mess with their livelihood.
Yeah.
But you do want to figure out how, and you could also say, look, so you retire when you're 60, 70, whatever, and then you work on it. But I think it's better to work on it and try to figure these things out prior to that. Um, in terms of the Achilles, I'm not saying plantar fasciitis is not related to the Achilles because you can look at pictures and see how there's sort of a visual continuation from the Achilles to the plantar fasciitis. But tendons don't really stretch and tendons don't really lengthen. So if I can't do a flat foot squat with my feet wide I can, but with my feet together and I do squats endlessly, calf raise into a squat, calf raise into a squat. Actually, a big part of my plantar fasciitis program are a variation series of calf raise exercises. But in 25 years of yoga, I have never been able to lengthen my Achilles to get my feet flat to the floor, where certain
That's
people can
interesting.
just do that with no problem. And certain cultures live in that position. Hold on
Can
one
you
second.
show me what you're talking about? Since you're standing up, can you show me what you're talking about? Like move the chair and show me what you're saying. So I'm a
So if I have my
little,
feet together,
oh, like your feet stuck together. Yeah.
so if I have my feet apart and turn them out a little bit, I can
Yeah.
fully with no tuck in my pelvis,
Word. Okay. I got
flat
you.
back and all that. If I have my feet together and I lift up into a calf raise and I bend down, I can maintain my flat back and
Yeah.
I'm straight up and down, but I can't get
But your
my,
heels are off the floor. Yeah.
so like yoga malasana, where you take the knees apart and you bring the hands down. For
Yeah.
25 years, I've been trying to get my feet flat to the floor, and they have never um,
Excuse me.
gotten any lower. And I think that is purely about the Achilles tendon. That the
So
Achilles tendon.
you're just for our listeners who are on audio only, you're bringing your feet completely together and trying to squat, and then you'd like to ideally keep your heels on the ground, but I think you'd be one in a million people because that's really hard because when you put your feet apart, obviously you're uh, widening your center, right? Whereas here, everything is super close together, so it's much harder for your heels to stay together. I think you have to have a lot more flexibility in your whole posterior chain.
But I'd say in yoga, a third to 50% of people can actually get their feet flat.
That's
And
crazy.
yeah, and
I'm setting up to try.
In Eastern cultures, that everyone can do it. That's how they live, right?
Well, that's not. Yeah, I'm pretty far down actually.
But in certain cultures,
Oh, that
that's
was hard.
hours a day. They work in that position, right? Feet flat,
Yeah,
knees bent, butt up against the heels. Like, so there are different reasons why we can't, but for me, I think it's purely my Achilles tendon. And the point of that is it has not changed in 25 years. So many things in my body have changed. Like you said about building muscle for my mobility, I have built a lot of muscle in my body compared to 30 years ago when I really had none.
right.
But I have not made an iota of change in the Achilles tendon.
Have you
But
been working on the strength of your like calf muscles, like all the calf muscles, like the soleus and the gastroc and all the peroneals and
I can't
tibialis,
say I
anterior, posterior?
I can't say I work on them, except I do those calf raises, I do calf
That's
stretches.
work.
I walk
Yeah,
a few miles a day. I bike, it's winter, so I bike 2 or 3 times a week, but in about, I've been able to bike almost all the last week. So that's working my calves. And um, so I don't know that I have ever like thought I'm going to strengthen my calves, but I think my calves are pretty darn strong
mm,
just from natural use. And I'd like to say from correct use, right? I do think I walk correctly and stand correctly and exercise correctly. So I am working my calves well, right? Like when I'm in plank, I think most people, I've been teaching publicly lately, which has been really fun. And I get to see
where
people here in Chagrin River Falls. And so online, it's really different when I'm teaching yoga to groups. But now back to being teaching publicly, it's just 1 day a week. I'm able to see bodies again, and it's really super fun but also super painful. So I put people in down dog and they just live in the exterior. They live in the outside of their palm. They live on the pinky toe side of the foot. I put them into
mm,
plank. They're in the outside of the palm. They're on the outside of the foot. And that to me is all fibularis, right? When you're wading to the
right.
outside, you're all in the peroneal/fibularis, and you have to get to the big toe to get to the gastroc and the soleus. So it's so much of it is just habit. And so I'd like to think ever since I changed about 15 years ago, I've been building my calves correctly as opposed to before I figured this stuff out for myself, I was doing the same thing. And I call it now like dumping energy, that when you're on the outer foot and the outer hand, you're just wasting energy. It's just dumping out. And that
Right.
another of my phrases is we get to the core through the inner extremities. So I don't know how to test the strength of my calves, but I'd like to think they're pretty strong.
No, I mean if you're doing calf raises and stuff like that, but I wonder if like your calves are maybe tight. It seems unlikely because nothing in your body is tight from knowing you
Yeah, no.
the way I do. Um, but maybe it's just that your Achilles tendon is also shorter or something like that. Because I
Yeah,
just tried your joint feet squat, and I could get down pretty far without my heels coming off the ground. And my calves are tight. I mean, I massage them and I like use the Theragun on them all the time. And I just got an email from you. Does posture
so
matter? And so I don't know what it's. That's an interesting conundrum actually, because I've seen you put your palms flat to the floor. Doing a uttanasana,
yeah,
and
so I do what I call the deep calf stretch, where I
yeah.
roll a blanket up in a mat
Oh yeah, that's
with both feet up.
atrocious.
both feet up on that, and I can still get my palms flat to the floor. So my calves
You
are not
can. Your
tight
calves aren't
there.
tight. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm getting a stretch there in a way that I don't get a stretch in other shapes, right?
Mm.
But when it comes to the calves, one of the things I don't think a lot of people are paying enough attention to is tight hamstrings are profoundly affected by the calves, and that the calves do not get their due. They don't get the respect they deserve, especially when it comes to resolving hamstring issues and to some degree plantar fasciitis issues. Um, Plantar fasciitis is a strange bit of business because I think more than anything, it's a misuse injury, right? It's a classic sports injury. Basketball players get plantar fasciitis a ton because you're going up and you're landing on your heel. You're not landing necessarily well. And
Right.
you're pounding your heel when you run, right? So what are the things that lead to plantar fasciitis? Overuse, misuse, and that's like when it happens over long term. I worked with someone yesterday who he took a long walk on the beach barefoot and woke up the next morning with plantar fasciitis. So
Yeah.
it can happen for different reasons. I worked with somebody not
That
too
makes
long
sense to me.
ago who say again.
It makes sense, like walking on the beach and getting, having like a flare up of plantar fasciitis makes sense because your foot has to adapt to like all the, your foot is moving around and stuff like it's not like flat. And it's just, I think there's a lot of like toe curling. And so your foot is probably just the arch is lifting a little too high,
Walking on
and
sand is really, really hard. But I
yeah.
had another client goes back a ways who was it was just a weird accident, but he was pulling like a really heavy box behind him and pulled it too quickly and it rolled over into his foot and ankle. And
Uh-huh.
from that, he developed plantar fasciitis. But to me, that's easy. I was able to say to the guy who walked on the beach, like, you'll be done, I think, in a month because when you have an acute injury, as long when you figure it out, you can heal, especially if
Yeah.
you're like 2% better. But that's my latest thing. 1% better. If you're a 1% better from your injury, you're healing and you just got to figure out how to keep that going. But when you develop plantar fasciitis over time because you've been walking poorly for months, years, a lifetime, that makes it much more complicated and much more difficult to resolve, right? So the plantar fascia, it's the thickest pad of fascia in the body. It's on the foot, it goes from the heel to the foot to the five toes.
Mhm.
And it's just to be clear, what fascia is a connective tissue like everything else that's soft in the body. We're just a collection of connective tissues with different tensile strengths, right? Muscle is connective tissue that has a lot of give. Ligament is connective tissue that has way less give. Tendon is connective tissue that has pretty much no give. And fascia is the same. Fascia molds to poor posture and patterns, but for the most part, fascia is not something we are looking to stretch. You go to the
Right.
raw to work your fascia, to open your fascia, to pretty literally
Realign.
rip your fascia open.
Yeah.
So plantar fasciitis is when this thick pad of fascia at the sole of your foot becomes inflamed or tightens. And then what happens is, for most, especially if it's a long time, the fascia, the connection to the heel starts to get lost and the fascia starts to pull away from the heel. And that's some fascinating business because
That's plantar fasciitis. Sorry.
that is the development of a heel spur.
Right.
And all not all plantar fasciitis involves a heel spur. Not all heel spurs involve plantar fasciitis, but very often they are connected. And the way the heel spur develops, it's kind of cool anatomy wise, right? The plantar fascia pulls away from the heel, and the bone, the calcaneus, the heel bone, all
Mhm.
bones are covered by this thing called the periosteum, and the
Mhm.
periosteum is what pulls away. So the fascia pulls away from the bone and it takes the periosteum with it. But the body doesn't really let space live in there. So what happens is when the periosteum pulls away and there's this tiny little gap between the bone and the periosteum, it'll fill that space in with calcifications, which is bone. And that what gets filled in is the heel spur. So that is like the heel spur that's developed from plantar fasciitis, and that never goes away, right? Like when you can resolve your plantar fasciitis, it doesn't mean the heel spur is going to disappear. It's not, because it's kind of new bone in the body. So in response to inflammation and swelling, the plantar fasciitis basically just gets angry.
Right.
And that's what the pain of plantar fasciitis is. Itis is swelling.
Yeah.
Really easy to diagnose so many things that people go through, right? Because itis is a swelling and it's just a swelling of the plantar fascia. And the way plantar fascia pain most often manifests is you wake up in the morning and you go to get out of bed, and the first bunch of steps you take are like walking on ground glass. It's this
Yeah.
crazy feeling. And I've never actually felt it because I haven't had it. But it's this feeling of walking on ground glass. And what's crazy about that is it tends to go away. 5 steps, 10 steps, 15 steps, and that feeling of ground glass goes away, and then that irritation goes away. And I'd say, I don't have a number, but let's just say 50% of the people with plantar fasciitis get to go through the rest of their day until the next morning. But then when plantar fasciitis gets really bad, it will stick around for the whole day and it can mess with your foot 24/7.
Right. I think that's what my client had. And she got orthotics and they fixed it. So now she's terrified of taking the orthotics off. But at least at home, she does walk around barefoot, but she will not exercise barefoot because she's afraid of like putting additional weight on top of it. You know what I mean?
I totally get that. It's just, to me, is if you exercise correctly, you heal the plantar fasciitis, right? Because
Mm.
in a lot of ways, I don't know from where she got the plantar fasciitis, but if it came from exercising, changing the exercise is a way to fix it. Um, a lot of people get orthotics for plantar fasciitis, which fixes the plantar fasciitis, and that's a beautiful thing. But what does that mean? Does that mean you have to wear orthotics for the rest of your life? Do you have to have orthotics in every one of your shoes? And if that's the case, that's the case. Like, again, you get through life, however you got to get through life. But I can't tell you the number of clients who I meet with orthotics where I say, you're not going to take them out today, but over the next year, you want to learn to walk in a way that you can get rid of the orthotics, because we're not designed to have that kind of support in our feet. Our feet are meant to be highly mobile. Orthotics limit mobility. They basically, they force you into an arch, which is good, but they limit mobility, and they're just not to me, not the best answer. And then I get it, if if you have a livelihood and you gotta do what you gotta do, and you go to the doctor and they give you orthotics and all of a sudden you're out of pain. Wow, that is so awesome. Same thing where you can't run for 10 years and someone hooks you up with Hokas and then you can run again. That is so awesome. But back to aging gracefully, what you get away with in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, you will not get away with in your 50s, 60s, and 70s, or 60s, 70s, and 80s. I had to amend it to teens for my son the other day. And I don't want to turn 80 and still have to wear orthotics, right? I'm trying to figure out how to get to a certain age with a body that works for me with every step I take.
Right. I think that's the whole, not the whole point of this podcast, but really it's what you're on about, right? Rejuvenation method. So um I mean, what are the ways in which you treat plantar fasciitis? With if you have a client that comes to you with plantar fasciitis problem, how do you help them to resolve it aside from telling them to take out their orthotics over the course of a year? Which is
So
funny because when like a podiatrist, well, not podiatrist, podiatrists are just like put these in and just whatever. But like physical therapists, they say like, put in your orthotics for like an hour a day the first week and then 2 hours a day the second week. And basically then they never tell you how to take them out. So that's where you come in, I guess, and say do exactly the opposite. Take them out for an hour a day and then take them out for 2 hours a day the next week or whatever it is.
that's kind of cool, actually. What I do is so simple, especially when it comes to plantar fasciitis. I just get people to take off their shoes or leave their shoes on because people send me walking videos to analyze and they're always in their shoes outside, right? Listen to the sound of your heel. Bang, bang, bang. Most
Right.
people walk really poorly and put tons of weight into the heel with every step. If you learn how to stop doing that, you are likely to resolve your plantar fasciitis. The way people stand is terrible. Most people are leaning backwards in their upper body and leaning their lower body, their thighs forward, which messes with the weight in the feet. I think it tends to put too much weight in the heel, but that's not always the case. But it doesn't allow you to have your weight evenly distributed through the whole foot. That can lead to plantar fasciitis. Then there's exercise, right? In the program that I just released, there's 21 foot exercises. There's like over an hour routine. And I'm just keep referring to this guy from yesterday, and he was like, I don't have an hour a day to do that. I'm like, find the ones that hurt the most and do those until they don't hurt. And then find
Right.
another one that hurts until it does, and do that until it doesn't hurt. And what I was able to say to him with the short-term injury, I don't think exercises are everything he needs because while I am foot obsessed in my yoga classes, we are doing foot exercises all the time, sitting on the feet, tucking the toes and sitting on the toes, and doing the toga where you lift the toes, doing the calf raises. I am really foot obsessed because how are you going to get to 80 and 90 without good feet? It's just going to make it much more difficult. I used to work in a hospice. I volunteered in a hospice. And if you've been to the hospital with older people and take a look at their feet, it's just a mess. My father, everything for me, the inspiration is my parents, right? Who broke down in their 80s. My mother, 5 years in bed. My father fell for the first, never exercised a day in his life, got through 75 years, fell, broke his ankle. It all went downhill from there. He never really recovered. He started falling a lot. Just a big mess. But his feet, and for different reasons, because he was a smoker and he had diabetes, type 2, and he was overweight. But
Mm.
his feet and ankles were so swollen that my sister used to say he doesn't have feet, he has hooves. And
That's
and
really funny.
isn't that, but when you
It's
go to the hospital and look at older
like a
people,
centaur.
right, exactly. When you go to the hospital and you look at older people, that's what a lot of people's feet look like.
That's fair.
Not to mention toes that cross over and bunions and, foot care is everything. If you take care of your feet, you are much, much more likely to age successfully. And that to me is so worth the effort. So standing, walking, and then exercise. But you think about it, like what I said about yoga and down dog and plank, and people just take it for granted. They go, I go to yoga, and yoga teachers for the most part don't teach anything. They put you through the paces, and they're
Right.
not, you know. I was on another podcast, and I said something about alignment,
What?
and yeah, I've been doing
Two
a number
timing
of them
me?
lately. So I said something about alignment, and the guy was like, "Yeah, but alignment is what is alignment?" And I was able to say, I'm not sure how alignment became a dirty word in the last 10 years because it really has. Like, there's all these articles like alignment is meaningless and there's no such thing as alignment. And I really just think that is absolutely nonsense.
That's
And
insane.
it's crazy,
Yeah,
and
it's
I get
insane.
it. The idea that maybe obsessing on alignment too much is not great, right? But change the word alignment to form. When you
Yeah.
walk, when you walk, you're supposed to put all of your weight on your big toe to push off to the next step. And most people do not. And all you have to do is look at your shoes. You pick up your shoes, you look at the sole of your shoe, and you see how it's wearing out. And most people's shoes, not everyone, because if you're pigeon-toed and there are different reasons why it wouldn't happen this way, but most people are wearing out their shoes on the outside of their shoe and not getting anywhere to the inside, which means essentially you're not using your big toe. So I don't know, call it form, call it alignment, but there is a better way to do things. And when it comes to yoga, when you do that, let's say you go to yoga 4 times a week and you feel great about yourself, and you should, because that's great. But if you're
Mm.
doing down dog and planks and chaturangas and all these things, and you're on the outer foot the whole time and the outer hand, that is a recipe for disaster. And now the disaster might not strike for 20 years, but still, to go back to aging well, the disaster is going to strike because the body should be built in a certain way. And like when I said about kettlebells, I got these kettlebells, and I'm finally succumbing to weightlifting, which I resisted pretty much my entire life. And I have to admit, I am loving it.
It's the
Doing
best.
it's
You and me,
amazing.
we're like, it's a
Yeah,
whole
I'm
new
not
world.
doing any, I haven't done any barbell anything, because it's all here in
You
my
come visit me, I'll teach you.
I have, well, it's a matter of if I'm going to buy a set, but I have
Yeah.
dumbbells and kettlebells. And what I was saying earlier is I've been watching a lot of kettlebell videos, and I have to say, I am really impressed. I haven't really found many that don't emphasize really good form. And to me, that's essential. And I have done a bunch of weightlifting in the past and always get injured. And this is the first, it's about 2 months now. This is the first time that I have been consistent with it and have not gotten injured at all. But we were talking about the Turkish get up, which is my new favorite exercise. And, my knees are wonky. And I have to say, I feel my left knee on my left when I'm using the left arm. Every time I make the move to pull the knee back, I am feeling something in my left knee, and I'm like, okay, is that going to catch up to me, or am I ordering the knee in a good way? And that's
Oh,
really
what do you mean when you pull your leg
so.
back
You
to
come
go
up
into
onto
like a
your hand,
half
and
kneeling position?
yeah, when you come up onto your hand, then you have to pull your leg back to
Yeah.
get up the knee, which is a super cool. I find there are two difficult moments in the get up. It's pulling that leg back, and then when you have to come up to stand.
Yeah.
And when I pull the leg back, I am feeling a little something in my knee, and I'm just monitoring it. I'm not going to freak out, but I hope it's ordering my knee and opening something that'll go away. I do know that when I first started the weightlifting, I was definitely feeling right elbow stuff,
Mhm.
and I was getting worried about that I was going to get tennis elbow again. And then when I introduced the kettlebells, all that right elbow stuff is gone. That is really cleared up and
Interesting.
that's really, really great. That feels really great.
You think it's the Turkish getup probably because it's helping to like stabilize your shoulder, and if I had to guess, your tennis elbow came from like a shoulder, something about the attachment of your bicep in the shoulder that the shoulder stabilization probably resolved.
I totally buy that. And I'll tell you that like many of the injuries I've had when I've tried working with barbells and weights in the past have been bicep stuff.
Yeah.
Bicep tendon stuff. It would always tweak out. And
So I think the get-ups are really good because they will pack. I mean, we're straying from plantar fasciitis because we're moving to the shoulders, but they will keep your shoulders packed down. That's like the main, right? It's a mobility exercise, but it's also like a shoulder stabilization exercise.
yeah, so
So
we'll talk about that in another episode because
yeah, definitely next month or whatever, next couple of weeks.
yeah, because
Um,
But let
But
me
yeah,
go.
no, because it's important. Actually, I think it could also relate to plantar fascia because when you're plantar fasciitis, because it is a mobility exercise, and to me, like and I could be wrong about this, so please correct me because you do have a whole program on plantar fasciitis, and I'm really not as well versed in it as I'd like to be. But the mobility of your ankle, I would think, has a lot to do with developing plantar fasciitis.
Well, it
Am I
totally can.
wrong?
I think plantar fasciitis can develop for a bunch of different reasons,
Right.
and ankle mobility for everybody. One of the things I used to start everybody religiously with stretching the ankles, and I got away from that, and now I'm getting back to it. And I tend to work with an older cohort where in yoga, I'll start class, sit on your feet, tuck your toes, and sit on your heels. And if you're really tight, put a blanket between your calves and your hamstrings. Well, I'm working with a bunch of people now who that is not even, they will
Yeah.
laugh if I suggest that. So I have them on a folding chair or a stable chair, like a dining room chair, and you fold your foot under the chair, and then you tuck your toes under the chair. And it's just a small way to get into it. But, I'll do that exercise with somebody and have them walk around and they're like, oh my God, like my feet are loose, and
Yeah.
I do that with all exercises. We do the exercise that I want to target, and then I have you walk or stand and you go, oh, it's much easier. And I'd like to think the brain that resonates with the brain and wants more of it. So back to aging, man. If you don't have ankle mobility, how are you gonna get through life? Like if
You
you're
can't fucking walk.
so all joints are
Like that's the bottom line, right?
right? All joints are reciprocal in the body. So if one joint moves, another joint must move as well. And I talk about this in the hips more than the ankle, but I should be talking about it in the ankle, right? So let's say, because tight hips are really classic, and especially classic in yoga. Um, let's say you have tight hips and you're walking down the street. So your hip joint doesn't roll very well, right? You want to have, when every step you take, there should be a little internal rotation, a little external rotation in that hip socket. But if the hip socket is really tight, you're not going to get that rotation. But if I'm correct when I say all joints are reciprocal, you need to get rotation to get up to the head and down to the feet. So where is that rotation going to come from? The knees or the lumbar spine, which is why
Right.
the knees and the lumbar spine are what break down in people the most. Because tight hips, plenty of people mess up their hips. But for the most part, tight things don't break down in certain ways. But the
Right.
knee has to take on mobility it's not necessarily designed to do. The lumbar is not designed to have any mobility, right? The lumbar spine has zero twist, 1 degree of twist in a back bend. So there's just no movement. So when one joint is tight, that movement still has to happen and has to come from somewhere. And when we use our feet, then if the ankle is tight, how do we get up the chain? So any work we can do to open the ankle is insanely beneficial and incredibly important. And it doesn't matter to me how old you are, as I know from working with people in their 80s. You can change your feet, you can change your ankles, you can create more mobility. Not necessarily easily, especially if you haven't done anything for 75 or 80 years, but with patience and perseverance, you can totally open up your feet and your ankles.
That makes a lot of sense to me because I have some clients who, and I do this too for myself actually. Come in with showing signs of ankle just stiffness, and I have them do what you said, right? Turn first of all, just even standing, put the top of your
Right.
foot down, and just lean into it a little. And they're like, "That hurts," and I say, "Yeah." Because it's tight, because your foot is the other way the whole time, right? It's dorsiflexed all the time. So you want to plantar flex it. And that could get into your plantar fascia a little bit, I think, because it just compresses it because it's stretching the front of the foot. But at the same time, like after that's done, it's just, they're like, oh, my ankle is so much more mobile. And then another one that I do is, have them plantar flex with their foot elevated and have a band, like a long elastic band tied to something on the bottom and just lean forward and back so that it's creating resistance. And when you take the band away, your ankle just goes, your knee just goes so much further forward. And so the mobility of your ankles is vastly improved. And then you can squat like so much better. And I think that's also the thing that you're talking about, right? Like if you don't have any ankle mobility, I'm talking about squatting because that's what I've been getting into a little bit more lately because that'll really work on, and a lot of people have problems with like not having strong enough or active enough glutes, right? Is like I'm getting into their glutes by doing squats, but in order to do squats well, you need your ankles to be much more mobile because otherwise you're sitting down and you're getting into your quads more than your glutes.
No, absolutely right.
So I think all those ankle mobility drills are fantastic, and it would stand to reason that like you're just working on your foot in general is gonna keep you from getting an inflammation in the fascia of your foot is and also like that thing that you do with the that you have people do with the tennis ball in your yoga classes, rolling the tennis ball under your foot, magical.
Every
you
day.
know
People should
yeah,
be doing that.
everybody should do that every day.
Yeah. So one of the exercises I use is I call it clean house, which is, put a washcloth on the floor and grip it with your toes and pick it up. Grip it
Yeah,
with your toes and pick it up. And I was working with somebody, it was like a month ago, and he said that was excruciating. And I said, that's great. I love the was in that sentence. He goes, yeah, it's getting much better. It's still hard, but it's getting much better. And it's amazing to me how people don't make the logical connection that it's not great to do exercises that are easy, right? You're looking to find the exercises that are hard and then make them easy, right? So I have this guy who screams when I have him try to stretch, like particularly his TFL, his tensor fasciae lata,
yeah,
and start to open the IT band, screams. And I said, look, anytime I make you scream, I know we found a good exercise.
yeah,
It's kind of what you need. But let me go into plantar fasciitis again a little bit about like the ground glass feeling and why that ground glass feeling happens in the morning, right? Because for so many people, it's overnight that the plantar fasciitis gets quote unquote bad, so that you feel that when you wake up. And what's happening is that overnight, the plantar fasciitis is plantar flexing so that the flat plantar fascia, as you sleep, starts to curl in on itself, And it's interesting because plantar flexion looks like extension, which I think
right,
is a cool little distinction, right? It looks like extension, but it's plantar flexing because technically you are flexing your toes towards your heel. So you go to sleep with a flat plantar fascia, but it's swollen and it's angry. And over the course of the night, it starts curling in on itself. And the plantar fascia shortens and it's like pulling you up into a high arch of a sort. So then you wake up in the morning and you hit the heel and you go, oh my God. And you go, every time you hit the heel, you go, oh my God. But over time, however many steps it takes, the fascia straightens back out and then you can go through your day. So one of the things they sell, because there are always things to
yeah,
do, they sell the boot that you sleep in,
yeah,
right? And that works. It does work for certain, no, not for everybody. Nothing works for everybody, right? But a number of people can go buy that boot. You can get it on Amazon for $20, and it keeps your foot flexed, or it keeps your shin and foot at a right angle, and it doesn't allow the plantar fascia to curl overnight. But again, it's similar to me as orthotics. Like it is great if that works and the plantar fasciitis goes away. But you're not addressing the root cause. So it's much more likely to come back at some point. That's just my take. But at the same time, if you get it once and you wear that boot and it works and it doesn't come back, that's good. That's good business. But I think
yeah.
it's important to understand that that is what's happening, that the plantar fascia is just curling in on itself over the course of the night, and that's what leads to that feeling in the morning.
No, the boot was something I was gonna ask you about, but now we've explored that. But yeah, I want to come back to like old people's feet. Um,
But wait 1 second.
not
Other
to,
people
yeah,
wear like compression sleeves around the foot because that pulls the compression sleeve pulls the fascia up to the bones.
right,
That's a fine thing. You know, I was talking to somebody about what a muscle pull is. Like, I think people don't realize what anatomically what it means to have a tight muscle. I'll use the hamstring as an example. And, I could be wrong, but I don't think I am. People think, this might not make any sense, but people think the hamstrings are tight, like up and down, right?
right,
Like top to bottom, they're tight. But my take on it is the tightness of a muscle is because the muscle pulls away from the bone. And that muscles want to live in relation to bones. And that's one of the things that makes muscles usable and stronger is their interaction with a bone when they're being used, right? The quadriceps sits right
right,
on top of the femur, which allows it to work over such a long span, while the IT band is alongside the femur, so no muscle could work that well. So that's why it's connective tissue instead of muscle, if that makes sense.
mm,
So a tight
yeah,
hamstring to me isn't tight up and down. It's tight because it's pulled away from the bone. And again, when
I
most
see,
people's posture is so the thighs sink forward, the hamstrings will only go with you to a certain degree. And at a certain point, you'll keep pulling the bone forward and the hamstring stays. And that's what creates the tightness in the hamstring. Um, so that's my take on what a lot of muscle uh, tightness is, particularly the hamstrings. And it's one of there are a lot of reasons why I'm trying to get people to get their thighs back, to get their legs under their
right.
hip. And that's really one of them. So when you put on one of these compression sleeves, it pulls the plantar fascia closer to the bones of the feet, and that is a positive. Same
Right.
thing again. You don't want to live with a compression sleeve on.
I'll buy that. I'm gonna have to do some research on that but it seems, I mean, it makes sense, if you think
And
about
here's
it.
the thing. It makes sense, and it's one of my theories that I've never got corroborated in any way. So that's why when I say something that I'm not absolutely positive of, it's my job to be confident. That's what I'm here
Yeah.
for.
Yeah.
But
I
I
say
I
I could
don't
be wrong, but I don't think I am. That
exactly.
was,
So
that was, I
uh,
like that you prefaced it with that.
but that is my take on that, and I have not
Right.
really seen like literature about that. Um, but it
Yeah.
also
Yeah. But
makes
it'd be interesting to
intuitive
poke
sense.
around and maybe find it because I mean, it does make sense, like,
So I do this exercise. It's not an exercise, it's a demo, and it's ridiculously simple and not scientific. But where if you put your thumb in the fold of your butt crease and your index finger down your leg
yeah.
and pointing straight down the leg, and you stand in old U, that pulls your fingers apart. And then if you take your thighs back and go to new you, your thumb and index finger get closer to each other. That's the natural length of the hamstring,
Right.
right? That's the positive length of the hamstring. Maybe I'll make a video and put it up on the show page
Yeah. Because
about
I'm having trouble visualizing it. But yeah, it makes sense. And that, I would think that travels all the way down to the plantar fascia too, because the hamstring connects below the knee, and then the hamstring and the like. Whenever you do a stretch for your hamstrings, your calves inevitably get involved. You know what I mean? Like there are very few hamstring stretches where your calf isn't involved as well. And I'll do stretches for like people's hamstrings, and they're like, "Well, this is getting more into my calf." And I'm like, "Well, that means your calves are tighter than your hamstrings, presumably." But
And in the same
it's
way,
wrong.
I'm always telling people, so people go into a forward bend and they stretch their hamstrings. And I say, what else is stretching? And they go, my hamstrings. And I say, what about your calves? And they go, no. And I'm like, well, how do you need to move to get it into the calf as well? Because it's a forward bend. And then once I
Yeah.
get them into both the calf and the hamstring, Then I say, what's going on in your back? And they go, nothing. And I, well, then engage your abs and see if you can move this into your spinal muscles, right? And then from there, I'll say, drop your head, take all the weight out of your head. So your shoulders and head and neck start to stretch, not the head, but the neck start, those
Yeah,
muscles start
yeah.
to stretch. A forward bend should stretch the entire posterior chain.
Agree.
Only when you only feel it in one spot, and trust me, like many people are feeling forward bends only in their hamstrings.
Because they're holding themselves up with their back and their legs instead of like just really folding over, right? You're supposed to fold over. It's like the only thing that should be, for me, like the only thing that should be driving up or engaged at all is like your sit bones going towards the ceiling, essentially. So you're pulling on your whole posterior chain, the bottom part, and then letting your head get really heavy. So it's pulling on your spine. And that to me, like when I do it, I feel it's everywhere. It just the whole thing gets stretched and it feels amazing, right?
Yeah, and it's really important to me. I'll spend minutes to get somebody into that whole body stretch. And then you can also use that and say, look, if you've been doing this for yoga or whatever, and you only feel your hamstrings, that means the hamstrings are out of whack, out of balance with all these other muscle groups, right? And when you look at, there are some cool images online about the posterior chain, like we are just connected, right? From
Yeah.
the plantar fascia to the Achilles to the calf to the hamstring to the sacrotuberous ligament to the lumbosacral fascia to the paraspinal muscles, all the way up to the suboccipitals. Like it's a chain like that.
Yeah.
The idea of the posterior chain, which I'm pretty sure Tom Myers like coined the phrase, but maybe not. Like it could have been around a long time before him, but I think he has definitely popularized it. Uh, it's such a cool concept, right? Like I listen to this hockey podcast that I love. It's 4 hours. It's like it's overwhelms my Tuesday.
You
Uh,
have you have too much time on your hands.
so well, and I listen to a lot of other podcasts because I listen to politics podcasts but I listen to this 4 hour hockey podcast and it just cracks me up. And they're really good dudes. And one of them, who's like my hero, this guy Paul Bissonnette, and he's been going for Thai massages. So it's just a comedy show as much as anything else. So they've been making fun of him that he's going for rub and tugs. And so they spend this time saying no, no, no. And then he's always, and then but he always throws out, he goes, no, they're just working the posterior chain. And he's just not a dumb guy, but I always wonder, like, how much does he understand about what the posterior chain is? Or is he just using this phrase that's kind of popular in
Yeah.
the parlance of the body these days? But yeah, it's a plug for, they don't need my help because they're super popular, but it's the Spit and Chicklets podcast. And they
Spin
do
chicklets.
they do interviews with like hockey players that I'll be on my bike cackling out loud. Like if people see me, they think I'm a crazy person. Um, but
I see people sometimes in the gym who are like on their headphones and just laughing. And I always think they're probably listening to Conan O'Brien needs a friend, but maybe they're listening to your hockey
yeah,
podcast.
right. Man, there are so many podcasts.
I know. None
So
of
many. It's
very few of them are as good as ours.
everybody has a podcast. It's really incredible.
It
Um,
is.
but it's great. I mean, it makes me so happy to listen to them. I learn so much. I
There's a
just
lot
listened
to learn out
to a
there.
2 hour
That's true.
podcast on sleep that I just loved. And then I listened to this other podcast, um, this guy Jay Shetty, who's like one of the most popular podcasts out there. And I'd never heard of him. So I listened to somebody else on his podcast. And then of course there was an article about him being something of a fraud in the Guardian. And I was like,
Oh,
oh, that's,
really?
but it's also so funny, like the zeitgeist, how I find him one week and then the next week I see the article saying he's a fraud. And I kind of love that. I love that. Synchronicity is fascinating to me. Um, so back to plantar fasciitis. We
Yeah,
don't have.
back to old people's feet, actually.
Oh, okay. What do you want to know about old people's
Well,
feet?
I didn't. It's not what I wanted to know, but I have my own share of septa and octogenarians that I either train or I give Zoom classes to, and I'll have them do foot exercise. That's the first thing we do, right? Is foot exercises, because then we're doing squats and stuff like that. And I want you to be using your fucking feet when you're doing squats. A lot of people don't even think about that, but you need to use your feet when you're doing squats. It's not just about your butt and your quads and stuff like that. So I'll have them work their feet, and I mean, you're talking about bunions, like hammer toes, and like toes that cross over each other because they're wearing these shoes that are super narrow all the time, especially ladies, right? Ladies' shoes are the worst things ever.
Worse.
Um, and and then just hard, like calloused the underneath of your foot, which should be somewhat soft, so it can just be much more pliable. So I think like doing these exercises and I learned a couple of them I took from you. I just stole them. Basically, I'd like to think that I borrowed them. But
I didn't
you
invent
know,
them.
lifting the big toe, and then lifting all four toes, and then now I'm having them try to put down the big toe and the little toe. And they're like,
That's
I
not
don't
how.
even.
That's
I have
genius.
no. They're like, I have no idea how to even do that. Like, I think there's. I can't really see them because they're on the screen, but and generally they're not showing me their feet, but and I don't think they can even lift up their four toes, keeping the big toe on the ground. Like it's just articulating your toes separately. I think it's completely a foreign concept to them. But we've been doing it for like a year, and I think it's getting a little bit better. And I think they're able to like at least grip the floor with their toes a little bit. Like you're talking about doing pickup. I'm really even more on about like pressing into the tips of your toes in order for your arch to lift up so that your knees aren't collapsing in, like stuff like that. And I try to do that with all my clients now, and just to really emphasize that foot health is important, which
So
I really do think like people don't think about very much at all, because people wear like weightlifting shoes, and I'm like, why are you wearing? You should be doing all this stuff barefoot. Like, what the fuck are you doing wearing weightlifting shoes that have a heel, by the way, that kind of elevates your heel, right? So that is giving you a little bit of give on your Achilles tendon, or a little less give, I should say, and that it still compresses your toes. Like I just don't really.
totally. Well, don't forget, I want to talk
It
about
upsets
heels.
me.
I want to talk about heels because I saw a great study about that. But first, the toga stuff. So the lifting the toes, that's toga. And that
Yeah.
I learned from Jenny Otto, who's a yoga teacher out of Maryland, who I think is a genius.
Okay.
I haven't seen her in 15 years, and I'm still doing exercises I learned from her. Just to be clear, this is a really interesting thing. Like some people can articulate all their toes. So when I started that, I could lift my big toe, I could put my big toe down, lift the other toes, put the pinky toe down. And I couldn't get the fourth toe down. And now I can get the fourth toe down. And I'm working on getting the middle toe down. And it's been a long time for that to happen. But to be clear, and this is an interesting thing, the big toe is distinct, the pinky toe is distinct, and the middle three toes of the foot are fascially bound.
Yeah.
But they're much harder to articulate. But my toes work really well. And when I'm in yoga class and I start doing the toga stuff and people can't do it, because I'll say bend down and lift your toes, and they can't do it, they just start laughing when they see what my feet do. And again, that's part of my mobility, right? When you have a lot of mobility, you can work your digits easily. But that is a phenomenal exercise, and everyone should be working on that because the more articulation you can get through the feet, the better. So I think that's great stuff. The other thing is people should just be playing with their feet. When you sit on the couch at night and watch TV or read a book, work your big toe, especially if you have a calcified big toe. People have big toes that don't work. Work your big toe. A calcification means blood and energy and nerves are not getting to the toe, so the joints start to
Yeah.
die. Work the joint. When you start walking through your inner foot, you're going to be using your big toe more, and it can come back alive. And but playing with it and rotating it and moving it are absolutely essential. Another exercise that I teach, and this started with someone who was 85, and I swear to you, I'm about to get on a call with this person going, what in the world am I going to do with this 85-year-old woman who had completely collapsed feet and ankles? Like when I asked her to stand up from a chair, her ankle collapsed to the floor to push up. It was this freaky thing. So I said, all right, all we're going to do is you're going to put a block between your thighs and a block between your feet. And just like the guy who screamed when I worked the IT band, she was screaming within 15 seconds. She was like moaning, going, whoa, because she had never really asked her feet to be that close together and parallel and
Right.
in an even place because it's just she'd been collapsing her ankles in for so long to do everything. And I see this in old people a lot, right? And that's one of the things I'm trying is I'm like, do you realize that your ankles are collapsing with every step as your feet turn out like crazy? Let's get to the center. Let's get to the midline. So I have people sit. So I started with her, 15 minutes, block between the thighs, block between the feet, and then stand up 5 or 10 times, trying to do without your hands and with a flat back, right? Without tucking your pelvis. So I started it with her, and then eventually I realized it's not only for people who are 85. I'm doing it with everybody
So,
now, and I'm trying to get people
yeah.
to work at their desk that way, right? But 15 minutes, if you don't, if you need to just isolate it, 15 minutes with a block between the thighs and a block between the feet. And if you need to start with the block a little wider between the feet, that's okay. But eventually,
Well, you put it on like
the thinnest.
the
You want
thinnest
both
setting.
blocks at their thinnest. And
Right.
what happens is like if it's easy for me. It doesn't, I don't feel anything when I do that. But I know
Yeah.
if I ask somebody to do that and they feel it, they are they're freaking out and eventually it'll get easier. And once it gets easier, it means your muscles, your ligaments, your joints are starting to accommodate to a better position. So
What do you
now
do?
I'm
You're squeezing the block
so it's a great question. No, you just leave it, just the block is there.
just like this.
Yeah, you can squeeze it if you need to, but you're just keeping your legs together so you don't, so the block doesn't fall. Just
And
like
then you'll
that.
stand up with the block between your thighs like
Exactly
that.
right. Exactly right.
Okay. Sorry, my camera's not
That's
great,
perfect.
but
It's perfect. And what's interesting is I don't say certain, sometimes I don't say anything, so I'll say stand up and I'll watch to see if people put their hands on their quads. Because if you don't have the core strength to stand up, you're going to put your hands on your quads for help. And ideally, you don't need that.
this is cool. I'm
Like
definitely using this.
I'm
I'm
weirdly
also
good.
gonna borrow this.
Right. No, dude, that is a great one. Um,
Yeah, it's really cool.
I maybe I invented that. I don't think I've invented anything. But I like to think I'm doing exercises all the time. Like we have a couch that it's not so great and you just kind of slump into it. So
Yeah.
whenever I get out of the couch, no hands,
Right.
right? And our dog, it's so crazy. Our dog has 5 dog beds in the house. The dog is like lives a more luxurious life. I have a bed under my
I'm
desk.
only laughing because my dog has four, and I'm like, this dog, do we really need four darn bed? And then she
Well,
not
the
only she has sometimes she uses my yoga mat because I'll leave it out and I come in here and she's like, on my yoga mat, and then as a result, my yoga mat is full of dog hairs and slobber because she slobbers on it. I'm just
I will
like, yeah, you have four
use this.
beds. Just what's that?
The dog uses all of them. There's one in my office she uses. There's one in our bedroom she uses. There's one in her crate she uses. There's one by the front window. But then she has this really big bean bag that was technically for sitting, but it became her bed. So every morning I wake up and I have like, what is my routine? And I go to the kitchen. I usually put away the dirty dishes or I go first to visit her on her beanbag. So I lay down on the beanbag and, give her some love. And then when I get up, I'm very close to the floor. Now I can't get off the floor. I can't stand up from a seated position on the floor without help,
It's
right?
very hard to do.
I used to be able to do it, and I gained some weight. And I'm really hoping I'm working on losing weight lately, and with my intermittent fasting, and I'm really hoping that I get that talent back. But every single morning when I sit with her on that beanbag, I then get up without using my hands. But I do it from a squat. Like I sit with my butt, so it's only like 6 inches off the floor with my feet sort of turned out, and I stand up from there. And I feel that that's like quads and glutes and so that like to me, so I'm exercising every minute I can think of it. And
Right.
that's a small little exercise that I use to start my day. That's great for the feet. And so when you were saying interestingly about people not using their feet and exercising, I find that people collapse their feet either to the
Yeah.
inside or the outside, and they need to learn how to stay grounded through the whole foot.
I'm always teaching people about the four corners of the foot, right? Because I think I like to think of the foot as having four corners, and I know that a lot of I'm not going to say literature, but a lot of like teachers they talk about the triangle. I like to think of it as more of a trapezoid shape where you have the inside heel, outside heel, and then underneath the mount of the big toe and the mount of the little toe. And if you can feel those four corners of your foot is bolted down. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And if you're doing any balance kind of work, balance exercise, and whenever I tell people like that's what you need to be feeling, and especially pressing into the mount of your big toe and a little bit to the outside of your heel as well, their balance improves dramatically, and
Dramatically.
sometimes people be like, it's that, and it's just because it's also like engaging your foot with the ground is also traveling all the way up your inner thigh. And what you're talking about is often like a lack of inner thigh strength, or let's say an imbalance between inner thigh and outer thigh. And when I say outer thigh, I mean mostly glute med, like an imbalance between those. Um,
Yeah, the big toe is your inner thigh and your psoas. That's how I like to look at
yeah,
it. And
right.
I prefer the four corner image. I don't have any problem with the triangle image. To me, it's really as long as you're getting your idea across and people understand what you're talking about. But I
Yeah,
really like the four corner image because I do like that inner and outer heel
yeah.
thing. In my yoga class, and in my privates, I probably say use the big toe 50 times. It's
Mm.
always the big toe. When we're squatting, come up through the big toe. Everything. When you're walking, it's all about the big toe. And the
Bridge
big
pose.
toe is the inner thigh and the psoas. And for most people, one of the main problems in their lives are weak inner thighs, right? Lack of tone in the inner thighs due to turnout and assorted other things and external rotation of the hip sockets. And that messes with your psoas because it externally rotates the psoas and doesn't let the psoas set back. So that big grounding through the big toe uh, activates the inner thigh, which activates the psoas. And that action is so ridiculously important. And
Right.
mention of plantar fasciitis, you have to use your big toe to resolve your plantar fasciitis. You have to walk through your whole foot, finishing
Yeah.
on the big toe. It's just absolutely essential.
We've circled back to the psoas again. The
Oh,
first episode we did, it's all
wait,
about the psoas.
I have to
And
interrupt you. Because I wanted to mention these high heels, right?
oh
Uh,
yeah,
I spend a good hour every week at least trying to find studies to read. And I was reading this study about high heels. And they did a study about wearing high heels. So high heels get a really bad rap. Like if you ever read about high heels, they're destroying your foot. They'll show you x-rays of feet in heels. So they did a study on high heels. And one thing they realized is they had never studied men wearing heels.
hmm,
All the studies prior were women. And they did a study wearing 3-inch heels, and they found that wearing 3-inch heels improved everything. Made your
really,
made your gait better, your balance better, and that it shortened the gastroc and the Achilles, and it maintained that when you got rid of the heels. So the efficiency that it improved with the heels was maintained after you took off the heels. And I thought that
Huh.
was cool. And one of the ways I'm teaching people to walk, I don't teach them to walk on the balls of their feet, but I put people up on the balls of their feet to walk because when you get your heels off the floor and you're on the balls of your feet, you can't have bad posture. It sticks your butt out. It
Right.
takes your thighs back. It takes your upper body forward. And
That's
when
true.
you're going into like tracking, like in the forest and stuff like that, you're using the balls of your feet. You're not using your heels, and that's how you're staying silent. So it's not an unheard of thing to walk on the balls of the feet. So I thought this study was just so I am so into the counterintuitive, like give me tell me something that everyone has always believed is right, is actually wrong, makes me so happy. So the
Yeah.
idea that heels can be good for you, I think is really cool. And going back to the beginning of the theater director choreographer who has to stay working, so can't really put herself at risk of getting plantar fasciitis, which I totally buy. It's the same thing when I lived in New York, I worked with a number of models, not here in Cleveland, who would wear 5-inch heels for work, for long periods of time. And I'm not going to tell somebody who's making a living that way to not do it, right?
Right.
But also have to step up your foot care,
Right.
right? You have to wear your yoga toes and do Epsom salt soaks and you have to up your foot care if you're going to wear the heels. So that see in this study that heels, and again, 3 inches, not 5 and 6 inches, that three
Right.
inches heels are good for you. I thought it was just really, really cool.
I
You
will
mentioned
say this, that whenever you see somebody like a woman with heels, their calves are always engaged. You know what I mean? They look really much nicer than when they're not wearing heels.
my first girlfriend when I was 18 wore heels all the time. She was like a
Hmm.
rock and roll chick. She was a bass player. And she would literally put her heels on and off and just show me her calves. And she really loved her legs. She's like, yeah, that's the gift God gave me. And when she would put her heels on, it improved her legs. Like you would see the definition
Yeah.
and tone of the calves. So I've known that for years without having any concept of it in terms of my yoga life, right? But there's a reason why women, not all women, plenty of women have no interest in wearing heels, but there's a reason why women like wearing heels. They make
Yeah.
their calves and legs look good. And more power to that. And then it's there is who is the actress? Maybe Rosamund Pike, but
Hmm.
no, I'm not going to get it. But she was a model, but there's like a meme online of her running in 5-inch heels in like Transformers, right?
Right.
And it's amazing. She is running really, really well in these spike heels. It's extraordinary to see. I think I'd fall over in a second because you can watch people in heels teetering and tottering. You're like you should not be wearing those because you're not doing it successfully. But there are people who wear heels really successfully and they just know how to walk with them. But I don't recommend people to wear heels, but I definitely recommend people to do things that make them feel good about themselves. I don't want to
Right.
take that away from you.
For sure. And like we said, like I think there is something maybe to be said for like calf strength, with heels. And what you were saying about 3-inch heels, I think you're right about 5-inch heels and their spikes. That's different than like a wider heel that's 3 inches tall, like where you have a kind of a bigger base. Um, but yeah, that's anyway, I think I like that we circled all the way back to the psoas.
We
I
should
think
always
maybe
circle
we
back
can
to the SOAS.
it all comes back to the psoas. But I think that maybe that's a good kind of ending point here. And we can certainly come back to talking about the feet because I think we're both a little bit feet obsessed, not in a bad way, not in that kind of way. Um,
No, that's
but
not a bad way either. That's a good way. Any foot obsession is good. Feet are great.
and
And
then
you
next,
can't get into yoga if you don't love feet. And you shouldn't. I'm telling you, a lot of people need to actively learn to love their feet.
yeah, I think that's true.
Feet are beautiful. Feet are wonderful. You have to love your feet. You got to play with your feet. You got to enjoy your feet. You got to use your feet.
And get foot massages from your significant other if you can.
I'm really bad about that. I am, when my wife was pregnant, I gave her a lot of foot massages and I was like, I
Oh, you're
can't wait.
so good.
I can't wait for you to not be pregnant. Um,
It's good for your
but
hands, for your thumbs, though. It makes your
if
thumbs
you
strong.
are a better person than I, you should give a lot of foot massages to your significant other.
Yeah, me too. I've not been good about it either. But maybe I'll start.
Yes.
All right. So before we sign off, I just want to thank everyone for being here. First of all, thank all our listeners for tuning in or downloading or whatever it is that we do nowadays in 2024. And if you're enjoying our podcast, please leave us a rating or review on whatever platform you're using. We do really enjoy these, but it's true that, we'd like to get the word out there and get people to log in more or not log in, but download or again, whatever it is we do these days. And the only way to do that is spreading the word is with your help. So thank you for leaving a review, leaving a rating, and just spreading the word about the podcast in general. And we're looking forward to doing more of these in the coming weeks. I'm hoping we can do one maybe in the coming couple of weeks about Turkish get-ups and some other kettlebell movements. I think, we're both feet obsessed and now we've both become kettlebell obsessed. It's funny how our lives, even though you've decided to move to Cleveland, are kind of running parallel tracks.
I love that.
I do too. So with all that being said, I'm gonna let you go so we can get on with our days, because I know you have a call, as do I. And I'll see you very soon. Thanks for being here today.
Have a great day. And all our listeners, have a great day as well. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.